the clock is ticking when it comes to the climate emergency. Started working with those cities that had identified and clearly demonstrated their demand for zero-emission buses.
It just seems like the momentum's building that stack up the confidence, I guess, whether it's the confidence of the cities or the investors.
Once you get to know this technology and you reap the benefits, we don't hear any operators that want to go back.
What are perhaps 2 or 3 key learnings that you would want cities around the world to be aware of?
The charging infrastructure is done ahead of time, even before the selection of the vehicle. It's very important to make sure that you plan ahead and that you factor in also softwares such as ITS, which makes the total cost of ownership of electric buses even more competitive when compared to diesel or gas alternatives.
The old question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in the case of electric bus rollout, it's very much the charging infrastructure.
And softwares can help you plan that ahead of time so that you can already optimize the operation of the buses so that you can maximize the batteries that you need to buy. We've started quantifying how many premature deaths you can avoid by entirely electrifying your bus fleet. We've seen much better efficiency when women are driving the electric buses.
Thomas, good to meet you in person.
Likewise.
We've been on LinkedIn connected for more than 8 years, I think, from when you were working with Climate Group.
That's correct.
And it seems like your journey has been really exciting because you were focused on e-mobility and buses back then, or e-mobility, and you've been on this journey. So maybe if you tell me a bit about the journey that you've been on and kind of what you're doing now at C40 Cities.
Of course. So I was working with corporate fleets back when we met, when I was at the Climate Group. And since then, I've joined C40 working on the Zero Emission Bus Rapid Deployment Accelerator, which in a nutshell is a zero emission bus program in Latin America. And more recently, also focusing on Africa and India.
And the abbreviated name is Zebra. Zebra, right?
Yeah, that's
coolest name.
Yeah. People will recognize the Zebra branding, and essentially C40 and ICCT, the International Council on Clean Transport, have been working since 2019 on this Zebra program, helping cities accelerate their transition towards zero-emission bus fleets. And we started working with those cities that had identified and clearly demonstrated their demand for zero-emission buses. So you would have São Paulo that had a clear climate law mandating of gradual full fleet decarbonization. You would have several cities that signed C40's Green and Healthy Streets Accelerator. But at the time, the market was virtually non-existent. There were no local manufacturers. There were maybe just 1 or 2 local manufacturers in the region. And there was a huge knowledge gap in terms of what finance mechanisms and business models were being used or could be used to make this transition viable. So essentially through Zebra, we try to connect all these dots, not only showcasing even further the demand, but stimulating and showcasing the offer, both from the industry perspective and from the finance perspective. And whilst doing so, capturing as much knowledge as possible and disseminating beyond the main cities that we work with. So it's been a very long journey since then, and we've achieved, I would say, really important milestones when we look at how the market has evolved. And that success has then led us to enter new markets, and we're now very excited to be working also in South Africa, working closely with the city of Cape Town and Joburg and the national government. And from then on, the future is yet to be told, but we're looking forward to expanding our work in the region.
Well, it sounds like you've built up some incredible experience as a team that can now be deployed in different parts of the world, especially in South Africa and Africa. What are perhaps 2 or 3 key learnings that you would want cities around the world to be aware of?
I would say that probably one of the main learnings is that when we look at zero-emission bus projects, we often tend to label them as a vehicle project, but rather we should be talking about energy projects. And in many cases, what's really fundamental is ensuring that adequate planning for the charging infrastructure is done ahead of time, even before the selection of the vehicle. And that is not often the intuitive thing to do. And we've seen cities that would have e-buses in their depots, but because of bottlenecks with the grid and the charging infrastructure, they can't be fully operational, and that carries a huge reputational risk. And obviously, it's not efficient. So some of the things that I've learned here at the UITP Summit, besides a lot of experiences throughout these years, is that it's very important to make sure that you plan ahead and that you factor in also softwares such as ITS, which, if done properly, in spite of having a considerable capital cost at the start, can give you, gains up to 20-30% when it comes to operational efficiency. And obviously this then translates into operational savings, which makes the total cost of ownership of electric buses even more competitive when compared to diesel or gas alternatives.
Interesting. So the old question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in the case of electric bus rollout, it's very much the charging infrastructure in terms of know what you need to use and what you will use, and then match your vehicle with that. And the software will help you take it even further.
Yeah, and softwares can help you plan that ahead of time so that you can already optimize the operation of the buses so that you can maximize the batteries that you need to buy. And obviously, smaller batteries means lower costs, lower weight, and the amount of chargers that you will require. We've seen very smart depot designs which have increased the number of buses per charger to almost 4 buses for one charger.
Wow.
Which, we start from the assumption that there's 2 buses for each charger usually. And then there's obviously the battery component, which obviously we don't have a crystal ball, but what we're seeing from other cities across the world that have started operating buses probably, over 6-7 years ago, the assumption that the battery needs to be replaced after 7 years is actually being questioned. It might have a longer lifetime in the bus over the course of 8, 9, potentially 10 years. So what impact does that have on the economics of the vehicle? And then what residual value does it carry that you can then use in a secondary life for the battery?
Great points. And you said there was a huge objective across Latin America to transition to electric vehicles, electric buses. What were some of the drivers that made them do that?
Well, it goes without saying that the clock is ticking when it comes to the climate emergency, and we have an urgent need to halve our emissions by 2030. We want to stay in line at least with a 2 degree global warming. What I would say is, obviously the main drivers is emissions reductions. When we look at transportation being responsible for a quarter of global emissions on average, but this share increasing to almost 50-60% when you look at some of the mega cities that we work with. Obviously, you understand the potential that buses have in reducing carbon emissions, especially when they run for 12 to 18 hours a day. Now, in addition to that, and that's something that we've tried to disseminate as much as possible, is electric buses come with a huge array of co-benefits. And we've started quantifying how many premature deaths you can avoid by entirely electrifying your bus fleet, how much you can save in healthcare costs from a city perspective if you are avoiding all the pollutants that are usually associated with a combustion engine. So those are some of the most obvious ones. And then there's also huge social and inclusive elements that we've kind of discovered over time. But electric buses can be used as a great way of social inclusions. Obviously, buses are predominantly used by the more vulnerable social groups. So of course, providing a better service is better in terms of inclusivity. We've seen cities doing some very exciting projects to bring on women as drivers for electric buses, often women that maybe didn't necessarily have a job before. And as often the case, we can see that women do the job better than men. And we've seen much better efficiency when women are driving the electric buses. And often the drivers themselves, they are great advocates of why electric buses are a great solution, because it improves their quality of life so much from the vibrations of a combustion vehicle. to an electric, the shift is massive. And of course, these vehicles, they come with new technological solutions that often you wouldn't have. Air conditioning, USB keys, sometimes Wi-Fi. These are all things that are appreciated by the users. And we've seen data in some of the cities that highlights how users, passengers, they are willing to wait a few extra minutes to get on an electric bus, as long as they know exactly when the bus will arrive, which is another problem that needs to be solved in some places. But there is this appreciation by the passengers for a product that is more comfortable, more reliable, and just all in all better for the quality of life.
So the benefits seem clear. Just briefly, what are some of the key barriers that are stopping things moving faster, say, in South Africa, but also incorporating some of the learnings you have across the world?
I would say, going back to what we were talking about, the charging infrastructure and grid upgrades that sometimes are required, these obviously represent huge bottlenecks. And when we look at the timelines of structuring an e-bus project, you might need 6 months to a year to place the order for the bus and get the bus. When we're talking about these big electricity grid projects, then you might need to think ahead 2 or 3 years before the rollout of the electric buses. So that's obviously one. We still see huge challenges in some public transport systems that need to be modernized. Central fare collection systems, digitalization of payments. These are all transitions that need to happen in parallel to the electrification. And because of, again, the urgency of the climate emergency, we can't just wait another decade or so until some of these issues are solved and only then electrify. So the real challenge is like ensuring that these two processes happen hand in hand. And then finally, I would say the financial component is obviously there, but that's where we need projects to be structured in a well and bankable way, so that you will have the interest of investors and financiers that understand the business model of electric buses. And when you look at longer timeframes for the project, instead of what we're used to doing with diesel buses that will have a 5 to 10 years lifetime, we need to think maybe more in the realm of 15 years. But if you manage to do so, the total cost of ownership is obviously, as we've clearly demonstrated through many of our studies done by the ICCT, the total cost of ownership is lower. So that in itself is a huge advantage for anyone who is running or owning electric buses.
Brilliant. Exciting times. It seems like success breeds success, and there's been lots of projects all over the world that you've been working on. In Africa, one project picked up an award this week, which is the Dakar EBRT project. I saw at your event in Durban, you had Rome, I think, were there, or was it Bazigo? You have electric buses being rolled out in Cape Town. So it just seems like the momentum's building that stack up the confidence, I guess, whether it's the confidence of the cities or the investors that need the confidence to put their money behind the projects.
Yeah, 100%. And I saw a very interesting graph today showing the levels of anxiety from the preparation levels to the rollout. And really, you obviously have a spike in the anxiety of an operator when preparing the project and the initial stages. But then it gradually decreases, because once you get to know this technology and you reap the benefits, we don't hear any operators that want to go back. On the other hand, we see operators that decide to double down on decarbonizing their fleet and going electric, such as operators that led the way back in 2017, like Medbus in Santiago. So we are confident that when the planning is done in an adequate and appropriate way, then the benefits are there to be made, to be enjoyed, and cities and operators will definitely continue on this transition and hopefully speed up some of the processes that other regions had to go through 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Now there's definitely a lot of momentum picking up.